Hi, everybody. My name is عزران. I'm a photographer and media consultant from New York. I'm actually in Israel right now, in quarantine, of course, in the northern part of Israel, in Emek, Israel, in a place called Shimshit. And we have with us today John Offenbach. He's a London-based photographer from his studio in North London. He has been commissioned to photograph campaigns for diverse range of clients, including American Airlines, American Express, Air France, as well as range of campaigns, include car campaigns, including Infiniti, Chrysler, BMW, Volvo, Bentley, and others. John has won several awards for his personal as well as commercial work. He published several books. His latest, named Jew, came out in 2018. A 4 years project, including 120 portraits of Jews from 12 countries around the world. The book Jew won the first prize in the category Book People at the IPA International Photography Awards in New York. Home is in West London, where he lives with his wife Jackie and children George, Alice, and Joe. In September 2009, and this is something that I'm personally jealous of, he swam across the English Channel in a team of 4 swimmers, raising money for Juvenile Diabetes Research Fund. And in 2014, with the very same team, he did it around Manhattan. So as a New Yorkers, if you managed to survive this swim, we are very happy to have you with us today.
Thank you. That was a very nice introduction.
Thanks. Let me ask you a very basic, how this project was born.
The project actually was born quite a number of years ago. And I was on an assignment in Brooklyn. And we were in a Jewish neighborhood, and we had some Shomrim who were with us, just helping out. And there were a couple of young guys, and while we were working, I was sort of not goading them, but I was saying to them, look, what crimes do you come up against in the community? What happens in the community here? And these two guys said to me, there's some fraud, and we have a few accounting irregularities. And I thought to myself, is that it? Is that the whole thing? And I didn't quite believe it. Many, many years later, just before I started this project, I Googled how many Jews are there on death row. There was an article in the Jewish Chronicle in 2010. A journalist did some research, and at that time there were 20 Jews on death row in Florida alone. And so I was. It made me think that the story was not complete. That people are. There are Jewish people who are being swept under the carpet, not being talked about. That the worst thing that could happen in Brooklyn was some accounting irregularities. And that's really how the project started. As a photographer, of course, I was well aware of August Sander, who was a photographer in Germany in the 1930s. And he attempted a very honest and a very truthful representation of the German people. He photographed an enormous amount of people, a huge body of work in 13 volumes. But with August Sander in mind, I thought that I would try to tell the truth and try and show the depth of Jewish people. This is what Jewish people look like today in the 21st century.
So actually, it's bringing me perfect to the next question. I've been going through the book and witnessed the various figures that you have in it, from religious to secular, men, women, young, old. So I would like to ask you, how did you decide who is suitable to be part of this complex project?
We didn't. I tried not to be too prescriptive about who's included and who's not included. But at the same time, I wanted it to be broad. I knew I knew before I started the project that there were Jews in Ethiopia and that there were Jews in India. I had no idea that there were Jews further afield, Azerbaijan, China. And so I wanted to keep it, I wanted it to be broad, and I wanted to encompass as many different ethnicities and as many different people in all walks of life as I could.
During the shoot, and actually during the preparation, did you feel that the participants gave meaning to their Judaism, or actually they tried to avoid that?
They were all different. Everyone's different. Obviously, when I was in Uman, which was an incredible place to be, obviously the religion is, there's a religious fervor there, which anyone who's been to Uman will know, shouting from the rooftops. Everybody was different. I think that, and in fact, I think one thing that I've perhaps learned is that everyone's relationship with their religion is different. It's different for everyone. There are no rules for me.
Speaking about learning, you will probably learn things about Judaism and the many faces of this great religion. Can you share with us some insight regarding Judaism in general, and more specifically, your connection to Judaism?
It's interesting that, so just to give you a little bit of background, I'm Jewish. I was brought up in North London in a relatively privileged, I had a relatively privileged upbringing in North London. My understanding of Judaism was very much drawn from the people who were around me. When I came back from Israel the first time, I photographed a homeless person, and the Jews around me here in London were shocked. They couldn't believe that there were homeless Jews, because you don't see them very often in London. Whereas in Israel, they laugh it off. They're like, yeah, sure, there are homeless Jews everywhere. So I thought that was interesting. But then when I was in Israel and I told people that quite a number of members of the House of Lords in London are Jewish, I think it's almost a third. That surprised many people in Israel. So it was interesting. There was an interesting balance or imbalance.
So I would like to ask you about the response that you get when the book was published, because I assume there also included a bit of criticism.
There was not too much criticism. Mainly, the criticism I received was why are there more men than women? Quite a few women said to me, there should be more women, and I'm not quite sure how to address that really. A lot of women didn't want to be photographed. In the religious community, women didn't want to be photographed. I would walk into Mea Shearim, and there were men who were very happy to be photographed, women who scurried away and said, I'm not interested at all. In Uman, there were hardly any women there at all. There's 30,000 people there, and pretty much all of them are men. So in one respect, yes, I could have photographed more women.
This will bring me to the access. I'm sure you had in some places great access to the people. But do you think that if you will do the same book with Christians or Muslims, how different will be such a book?
I think I would love to do a book on. I would love to do Christians, and I would love to do Muslims, maybe American Indians. I think that I would love to do a book on Muslims, but I think access would be quite difficult. Walking around Oman, telling people that I'm photographing Jews, for me, was easier when they knew that I was Jewish. I think if I went to, I don't know, but if I went to, I don't know, if I went to Mecca, I don't know. I don't know. All I can say is I'm not sure that I would have the same access that I would if having shot Jew. But perhaps. And I don't want to get too political because it's never been a political project. For me, it's always been a cultural project. But I think that I could easily do a project on American Indians, and I think something like that could be quite interesting, to find American Indians who are at all different places.
So you mentioned
from professors to homeless people.
So you mentioned the limited access to women. Actually, do you have people that you like to shoot and you didn't get access to?
Yes, there are people who I still have some photographs. I would love to do a book too, because there are still some photographs that I think haven't been taken. The project would benefit from generally.
Jew, that's the name of the book. Why did you decide to name this book with such a loaded word, which even holds a connotation of derogatory?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it is a loaded word. I try and wonder why it's loaded. In one respect, there's an aeroplane going overhead. Can you hear that? Ariel, I'll just wait a second while they're. We were talking about the word Jew. So
you
yes,
want me to ask you again the question?
Shahar, you're right. The word Jew is loaded, and historically it has derogatory terms. Hey Jew, hey you, hey Jew. I wanted to re-own that in some way. I wanted to bring that home. When I suggested to my parents that I was going to call the book, I had a conversation with my mother, and she said to me, "Oh, what are you going to call the book?" And I said, "I think I'm going to call it Jew." She sat back. She said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Why? Why can't I do that?" She said, "Because it's not nice." And I said, "Well, I think it is. I think it's a good thing to re-own that word. We are all Jews. There are 120. There are 120. I have the book here. There are 120 portraits in the book, and each one of them is a Jew. So I don't understand why I can't call the book Jew." There is somebody pointed out to me that the New York Times wrote an article about the word Jew. In fact, I think it's been written about quite a bit. I'm not an academic, so I don't see all of these things that are written, but I know that American presidents and people in public life tend to call Christians Christians, Muslims Muslims, and people from the Jewish community. And and it's interesting that people shy away from saying Jews. So that's another reason why I wanted to call the book Jew. And in fact, the publisher, I had it written into the contract that it should be called Jew.
Yeah. Why do you think the publisher actually? Why did you have to put it in the contract, something like that?
I think some of the distributors were a bit nervous about calling the book Jew, and maybe I mean, who knows? I mean, who knows how it would be if it was called something else? But what else would you call it? Jewish people, Jewish portraits, a portrait of Jewish people, a book of Jew. All of it sounds not right. All of it sounds like a fudge or it doesn't sound as how I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be direct. They're portraits of Jews. What else should I call it?
So I'll ask about your target audience. So you call it Jew, and do you think it's affected your target audience?
My target audience, in my mind, my target audience is everyone. I think everyone should have the book.
No, photography-wise, of course, I do understand. You come as a photographer, but the name actually. I'm sure your publisher think about different numbers that you think, and that was my concern from that point.
Look, I wanted to show in some way that Jews come in all shapes and all sizes and all colors. And that's ordinary. I wanted to show that there was an ordinariness and there's an ordinariness in the fact that everyone is included. There are murderers. There are religious people. There are secular people. There are dancers, rabbis, everyone. My target audience. I don't want to predict that. For me, I think it's an important book. I would like to see it in as many places as possible.
In Israel, do you know? You can buy it. Can you buy it in Israel?
I think it's available from Amazon.
From Amazon, yeah. So let's talk a bit about photography a little bit. As a photographer, when I travel, of course, I plan my photo shoot. I take the right, I hope, to take the right equipment with me. I'm looking at your book, and you've been in 12 different countries, 120 different portraits. How did you plan photography-wise those trips? And you know what? Not only photography-wise. Tell us a little bit about the process of research.
Yeah. We can start photography. We can start with the technical side. If I'm traveling for an advertising campaign, I will, probably travel with, 10, 15 cases and a couple of assistants. But when I was doing this project, none of that was available to me. I was traveling on my own. Also, in many cases, I knew that I could take just one bag with me. So I very carefully planned kit that all the portraits are lit, and they are all against a grey background. So I had to take all of this with me, and so I had a bag that's about 4 or 5 foot long, and in it I had enough space for 2 lights, 2 rigs, background, my cameras, and a little spare space for a change of socks. And that's what I traveled with. And most of the portraits Yeah, most of the portraits are lit in exactly the same way. One or two of the portraits are shot in a studio because there were some people that I wanted to invite to the studio. So, for example, the portrait of Oren Almo, I invited him to the studio. So there was one day where I took a studio, had people come.
And so let's discuss a little bit of research. So before you fly, for example, to Uman or to any other locations, what kind of research did you do?
Most places, most of the research came from, one email goes to another email, goes to another email. It's like a river, I'll speak to, I had one, as a rabbi here in London who seemed to be unbelievably well connected. And the Lubavitch rabbis are all unbelievably well connected. They know everyone. And so I had, in many places, there would be one phone call or one email that would lead me to another, that would lead me to another, that would lead me to another. And eventually I would feel confident enough that there was enough for me to shoot to make me buy a plane ticket. So in India, I made one connection, and the person that I met there introduced me to quite a number of the community, and in some cases they just helped me set up the shoot. So I would go from one location to another location to another location, spend 4 or 5 days in a country, and then come home. The same thing in Azerbaijan, the same thing in Argentina. I had a fantastic guide who actually made it into the book, I've just called him Guide, because he was so fantastic and he had such a great, fantastic face. And he was a terrific guide, and he helped me around Argentina. How do I? Sorry, the other part of the question was how do I decide who I was going to photograph? It was different in different places. So, for example, when I came to Tel Aviv, I set up in Tikva Market, and we took an empty stall and we set up there for a day. And I had some help with me, and so many people were passing. It was easy for me to just pick interesting people as they were walking past, discuss the project, discuss their Judaism, and then photograph them. In other situations, I actually planned people and chose people to come to a sort of makeshift studio. So when I went to Brooklyn, for example, I had a fantastic connection there. A girl called Elka, and she helped me find people and bring people to a makeshift studio that we had in a shop. So it was different. In different places, it was different.
I would like to ask you something about more personal. I travel with groups. For example, when I go to Auschwitz with a group of survivors, or when I photograph people making Aliyah to Israel, I travel on the plane with them. It's one of those moments that you feel a proud Jew. And can you find moments during those 4 years when you found yourself look in the mirror and say, "I'm a proud Jew"?
Yes, there were moments. Moments of things that I didn't know. For example, I discovered that something like a third of Nobel laureates, Nobel Prize winners, about a third of them are Jewish. I found that astonishing, and that made me quite proud. even when I talk about it now, the hairs stand up a little bit. I don't know. I tried to, in a way, with the book, I tried to break the stereotype in a way. I didn't want a book full of Jewish businessmen. That's it was given and sort of accepted, but I personally didn't know about the number of Nobel laureates, and so that made me particularly proud. And even strangely, even in the very even in Meir Sharim and in the Jewish community, in the Orthodox Jewish communities, I felt that people were passionate about the lives that they lead. I'm passionate about photography. I have a huge library. It permeates every part of me. But it was interesting to see. I enjoyed being with people. That the religion was everything for them. It was interesting.
Your amazing book includes 120 beautiful portraits of Jewish people. My favorite is Weaver. It's of Ethiopian gentleman. The first thing that I saw was his eyes, the composition, the lighting. So definitely for me, this is a wonderful image, especially now when racism, anti-Semitism is on the rise. That's for me really a pristine image. I know that you have 3 kids, so I'm not going to ask you about your kids, this question. However, I will ask you about the 120 portraits. Which one is your favorite?
Shahan, I knew you were going to ask me this question, and it's just an impossible question to answer because I love so many of them, and I love so many of them sometimes for different reasons. Sometimes because I know what it took to take them, and some of them I just see something in their eyes that I love. It's so difficult to find a favorite. There's if we have time for one more story, there's a shocket that I photographed in Manchester in England, and I spoke to him on the telephone first, and I said I told him what I intended to do, and I wanted to come and I wanted to make it as authentic as possible. I've been a photographer for so many years, and I know that getting into an abattoir is incredibly difficult. I knew that I would never get permission to go into an abattoir. So I said to him, look, can you make the portrait as authentic as possible? And he was like, yes. I could hear him on the other end of the phone going, he was thinking about the portrait. When the day came, I went to, I took the train to Manchester. I went to his house and I set up the lights the same as I always did. And he said to me, okay, so authentic, right? I said, yeah, authentic. And he opened a black bin liner and he pulled out his work clothes that were dripping with blood. And he was standing in front of the background with covered in blood, with a pool of blood on his house, on the floor of his living room floor. And he didn't think it was strange. And his wife was walking backwards and forwards behind me, and she didn't think it was strange either. Anyway, so I love that portrait. I love him and I love that portrait. If there's time, I'll try and find it.
Yeah, well, we'll find it. I'm sure that some images. As a photographer, I know that we fall in love in images that we invest time, we invest like a lot of, and then some images we spend 3 minutes in a place, and then we have like an amazing image. So, which one which image do you think did you invest? Oh, that's the image of.
There's the shot.
Yeah,
that's one of my favorites.
So, which image you feel that you invest the most in?
There were a few that there were a few images that took a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, a lot of jumping through hoops. Bruce Rich is he is convicted of murder. He's in an American prison, and it took a lot to go and photograph him. I had to jump through a lot of hoops to get the accreditation and to get the sign off to go to an American prison and photograph him. That's probably the portrait that that took the most to actually get in front of him and to sit down with him. When I did sit down with him, it was a strange meeting. He seemed so familiar. I was sitting in the hotel having breakfast, preparing for the day, and I knew that he had murdered his mother and his father. He tried to make it look like a murder. He tried to make it look like a murder-suicide. And I was preparing to meet him, and I knew that I thought I was going to meet a monster. I mean, I thought I was going to meet someone that was very obviously evil in some way. And when I walked into the room with him at the prison, he was quite the opposite. I mean, he seemed very normal and very nice, and that in a way, was even more disturbing. That he was like that. I mean, you want him to be a monster because that separates you from him. He's the monster, and I'm not. And the fact that he was in most ways seemed very normal. That's very disturbing. And in fact, I have a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist. He's a forensic psychiatrist. And when I told him the story, he was not surprised at all. He was like, "Yeah, I see people like that all the time." And he did something in his life which was not the right thing to do.
Yeah. So I'll ask you, what was the easiest one? Which one was the quicker, in and out, and you can't believe that you have a great image within minutes? Which one was it?
Some were quick. I mean, when I was in Uman, and there were tens of thousands of Jewish people walking in front of me, I set up in the street. I put up a tent in the background and the lights and everything by the side of the street, and in many cases just saw people, asked to take their, explained what I was doing. Everybody signed a form, and some of them came and went very quickly.
John, thank you so much for being with us today. We're all looking forward for Jew 2.0. I don't know what the name will be the next book, but thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Shahar. It's nice chatting to you.
Thank you.